Hello, and welcome to this month's synth tutorial with computer music. This month we're going to create a pretty unique bass sound that makes extensive use of the ZebraCM plugin set to a bandpass filtering mode, although we can also use high-pass filtering for a slightly different flavour of effect as well. So as usual, we'll start by performing an initialization to our patch so that we have a default starting point. Go to the window that's at the top of the plugin, which also doubles as a display and a drop-down menu, and select Init from the bottom. Once you've done this, move down to the Master Volume Control setting, which is at the bottom right-hand corner of the plugin, and set that to a value of 50. Just a reminder for anyone new to using this plugin, anytime you make an alteration to a pot on the screen, you'll see the value indicated at the top in the display. There's no better place to start creating our patch than oscillator number 1. So moving to the oscillator 1 section, we're going to leave the sawtooth wave, which we already have in play, and leave the volume set to a value of 100. What we are going to do, which is a little bit different from the default, is change from a number 1 to number 2, and this setting relates to the aliasing of waveforms, and by selecting that we thicken up the wave from a single wave to 2 waves. That thicker texture is the sort of thing that we might be able to recreate on a mini-moog where we have 3 oscillators in play. Because oscillator number 2, which I guess you could say is our third oscillator, given that we're using aliasing, is going to act as a sub-oscillator. In order to replicate the absolute classic sub-oscillator, we want to set the waveform to a square wave, and we do this by clicking and holding on the waveform itself and dragging the mouse upwards until we see a value of 2.0 at the top. You'll also see that the wave shape has changed to a square wave. At the moment, the volume of the sub-oscillator is turned down, so we're going to increase the volume here to a volume of 32. Notice it's 32 and not 100 like oscillator 1. Sub-oscillators can be very overpowering, so we're going to keep that fairly limited so it doesn't get too in the way. We'll also need to change the tuning of the oscillator, so we visit the tune pot here, click and hold on it, and drag it down to a value of -12. This is indicating semitones, and there are 12 semitones to an octave. So we should now hear a sound like this, which is the aliased wave from oscillator 1 and the sub-oscillator wave from oscillator 2. The element which is going to give this particular patch its character all extends from the filter. We're going to use a slightly different filter this time around. We're going to use the bandpass BP Q-band filter. So when you play this sound, it's going to sound a little bit like a wasp in a jam jar. Or it sounds a bit like a Tesla coil or something like that. By altering the cutoff control, we can hear more of those mid-coloured harmonics, so you might be wondering what a bandpass filter actually does. In essence, it sets a lower band and an upper band, and everything within those 2 points you will hear. Consequently, if we play the sound with the cutoff quite high, it sounds really fizzy. If we play it very, very low, it sounds very dull. If we play it in the middle, we'll hear all the middle harmonics. And of course, we can sweep around if we want to as well. And what makes this particular filter relatively unique is, as indicated by the Q, we have quite a high resonant curve which is already in play without using the resonance control. For the purposes of our patch, we want to set the cutoff pot to a value of 0. This means that it's going to be very dull indeed. However, we're going to alter that considerably now by changing the envelope 2 modulation pot which we have in the filter section here. You'll notice that this is already pre-assigned to envelope 2, so we're going to drag this up to a value of 105. And upon doing so, we should immediately get some of that brightness back. So it's now time to turn our attention to the envelope section. We'll begin with envelope number 1, which is providing the volume or amplitude control. We're going to leave the attack pot set to a value of 0, the decay pot set to a value of 37. We're going to change the sustain pot to a value of 0, and finally the release pot to a value of 35. Our settings on envelope 2 are going to be very, very similar, and if you remember, these are heading toward the filter section, so anything we do here will be replicated across the filter. Leave the attack pot of envelope 2 set to 0, set the decay pot to 37, set the sustain pot to 0, and the release pot will set to 36. Having made those subtle alterations, we now have a nice punchy bass sound that sounds like this. So our synth patch is now largely complete, but there are a couple of other little details you might like to just explore before you finalise your patch. First of all, consider what you might do for your equalisation or tone control. Because of the nature of the filter, it's entirely appropriate to bring some bottom end back into the sound, and we can do this using the EQ. You can see the curve that we've got generated here. It's relatively established in the bottom end. So another thing you can do to really look after the colour and also the volume of your sound is make sure you use a compressor. And using something like a FET or an 1176 style compressor will really accentuate the bottom end frequencies as well, so that's a good choice for this particular setting. Finally, you can do something very cool with automation. You can see an example of this here, where we have automated our cutoff pot to start at a value of around about 102 and then sweep down so that by the time it reaches bar 5, it's fully open. So that's our bandpass filter base for this month. We'll see you next time.